In this video, I'm going to make this pencil holder inspired by my girlfriend. I will show you the whole process from the concept through 3D modeling, 3D printing and painting, including the final result. Well, let's start with the concept. This idea came to me from a 3D model I did for my girlfriend about a couple of years ago, and this was simply a 3D render inspired by her, but I felt that it was a lot of effort for that 3D model to stay alone on the screen, so I decided to make a pencil holder for her Apple Pencil. Many people have asked me what software I use to make my model, so let's talk about the software. To make this model, I use ZBrush. This program basically allows me to work the polygons as if they were digital clay. So what we see on the screen is an example of a generic character that can be created in a few minutes. But we can also import a predefined geometry and modify it to our liking. I did my girlfriend's model a couple of years ago, and sadly I don't have a video record of the process, but I have all these images that show the whole process of how I modified the face until I reached a point where I was happy with the result. Well, once the face and body were finished, I started the simulation of the clothes. I did this in another software called Marvelous Designer, but I will talk about this software in another video. Once the clothes are finished, I added some details, especially on the shirt, for example, this grid. The details are exaggerated because otherwise the 3D printer would not be able to print all those small details. So I did the same with the eyelashes, that is, I had to add this geometry around the eyelashes because the printer was not able to print the little hairs. So for the plants, I used a plant library that I have available and downloaded some models from the internet. I have also arranged the plants around the main character and added this little cylinder at the back that serves as a reference to put an Apple Pencil there. Then I added the flowers around the character and I added this terrain, which is a hyper-realistic 3D scan, just like the rocks on the back. Then I added the glasses, the hair and the ukulele, and I divided the model into different sections. In this image we see the character without arms. Instead, she has some little keys on the elbows and on the torso, so this allows the model to fit perfectly with the other models. For example, it fits well on the back of the rock. Here we also see that the model is divided into two parts. I did this because the printer I was using was very small and it did not allow me to print a model of that size. This hole that we see in the arm is where the little key is going to be inserted, and it fits perfectly and the arm does not move. Once I'm happy with the separation of the objects, I send the model to Lychee Slicer. This is a software that allows a translation between the 3D model and the 3D printer. These orange bars that you see there are the supports that helps the printing process, otherwise the print will be in the air. On the back we see these small gray cylinders. Actually, these cylinders are hollow because the model is also hollow. So these cylinders are used so that the resin does not get trapped inside the model, otherwise the model will end up cracking or breaking after a few months. This software is super cool because it allows us to see to a scale more or less how the print would look. So once I'm happy with that, I export the file and take it to my 3D printer. When printing with resin, I always wear gloves, an anti-fluid suit, and a mask with organic vapor filters. I do this because the resin in its liquid state is a bit toxic and requires certain care before being cured. This print took 8 hours. The sticks that you see there are the orange supports that I talked about earlier. I printed the model of the torso, but also the glasses and some plants. The model of the rock took longer. The print took almost 10 hours and it went wrong, so I had to repeat it. I had to clean the models, and to clean them I used 96% industrial alcohol. Once the alcohol evaporated, I started the post-curing process. I had to do this because the models at this stage are very fragile. So to cure them, I used a UV LED light. Then I started to join in parts with super glue. This glue works very well with resin and is also used to fill in small cracks. Once the glue is dry, I clean the entire model with a small brush and start the priming process, which basically consists of put a thin layer of primer on the model so the acrylic paint can adhere better. To paint the model, I use acrylics and I like to mix them using this nail polish shaker. These acrylics are super thick, so I use a mix of 2 parts thinner to 1 part of flow improver. This allows me to use them with an airbrush without problem. Then I paint the larger plants, making a color grading, and as for the small plants, I paint them directly with a brush, and I do the same with the flowers. At this stage everything looks very flat, so I add a black wash, and once it is dry I paint on it with bright colors. This makes the cracks have a dark color and the raised parts saturated colors. What we see on the screen is the dry brushing technique, and I am applying it on the rock. Next, I glue the plants, I paint the edge of the base, and I just need to fill in the cracks that were left when gluing the plants. For that, I use this creamy resin. It is super easy to apply and has a short drying time. Then I paint the last detail and the base is done. So I'll move on to the main character. I masking it with a masking putty. This works very well since it allows you to mask quickly and doesn't leave any residue, nor does it strip the paint. However, and as we can see, sometimes it's hard to get to all the little edges, but you can easily correct that with a fine brush. Now I paint the shirt with 3 different levels of gray, and I give it a little dry brushing pass with white paint. For the skin, I start with a layer of yellow. Then I do a couple of blue and red washes. This is just to simulate the veins. And then I added layers of different desaturated colors, and I finish it with a layer of reddish orange. My girlfriend is a huge fan of AC/DC, and therefore I printed the AC/DC logo on adhesive paper and glued it to her chest. Finally, I glued her glasses, I painted the ukulele, and the model is ready. I hope you like the model. I'll leave you with the final result, and I see you in the next video. Bye!